Hey, everybody. Welcome to the H2G podcast. We had a very serious topic yesterday, and this one's still, I would say, in the ballpark. But it's something I wanted to talk about, not for myself, but because I do believe this is a huge issue overall, and I'd like people to kind of at least get informed if they don't know what's currently going on. So what we're going to talk about today is student loans, right? Now, a couple years ago, Bernie Sanders wanted to cancel all student loans, which, on paper sounds amazing. Yeah. All right. So the hyperbole aside, the idea was to cancel student loans. And there's a million reasons why, right? As we all know, education and the cost of secondary education has drastically gone up to when, our parents or grandparents went to college, if they did go to college. So there's a lot going on with privatization and the monetization and the textbook industry and all these things. And we're not going to go into all of that. Let's just discuss student loans. So I'm going to go over some lists that I made in terms of if we cancel student loans. Let's go with the pros real quick. I'll do this list real quick. One reason would be financial freedom. It would create freedom so borrowers can buy a home, save retirement, launch a business and increase the GDP, or start a family, right? Just the financial freedom would help. The economic stimulus would stimulate the GDP through job growth based on these companies, etc. Having said that, this would take at least a decade, right? If you cancel my loans now and I say I have $100,000 in debt, it doesn't magically mean I start a company, right? So it takes time to build these things. It would reduce inequality. It would reduce social, economical, and racial inequality and disparities, right? At the end of the day, let's be honest, a lot of the things with college is trying to get scholarships and not being able to, so dealing with those loans. So for a lot of people that are in the lower income brackets, this would significantly boost and help them from a personal perspective. Reduce depression, quite frankly. It'll reduce the anxiety and depression from these debts that are growing, particularly when you consider, and we'll get into that, private loans versus federal loans. When you have a private loan, you have a much higher inflation rate, and that's what most people have. And then what we call is fairness. I've heard a lot of people talk about this, that we bailed out corporations, we bailed out billionaires, so we should do relief for everyone else. Let's go with some of the cons to canceling, and it's going to be similar. Exclusionary. There are more than 200 million adult Americans who don't have student loans compared to the approximate 45 million that do. Cost. If 40 million Americans each get 10,000 student debt cancellation, the debt cancellation would be about $400 billion. So now these are just the figures I've looked and researched based on the government's statistics according to 2019, not 2020. Wealth transfer. Federal taxpayers would pay to cancel the student loans because it doesn't just magically disappear. Our tax goes into the federal income, and that's where they budget. So the point being is, of those 200 plus million who didn't go to college or aren't going to college, don't have a loan, they're contributing to the 45 million I currently do. Poorly targeted. Student loan debt cancellation disproportionately benefits graduate students who earn higher income than the undergrads. Fairness. It's unfair to past borrowers who worked hard and struggled financially to pay off student debt. Ineffective. Student loan debt cancellation is short-term thinking that doesn't address the underlying issue, the cost of higher education. No stimulus. The student loan debt cancellation would not stimulate the economy. The short-term GDP impact would not have anything to do with forgiveness. It would just be the monthly loan payments. So the impact wouldn't be seen for over a decade. And other economic priorities, multiple second or third stimulus checks, keeping unemployment benefits higher, getting education funding more, or small business loans may provide better financial relief. So those are the pros, and these are some of the alleged cons. Now remember, this isn't my opinion. These are just opinions I pulled from the internet. Let's clarify. Canceling student loans. There's going to be different types, so we're just going to talk about it. As I joked at the beginning, Bernie Sanders had a great idea, right? Like, let's cancel everything. $1.6 trillion would be dedicated to canceling all debt for student loans. So then after that, there was another one. It was cancel 95% of student loans, and that was Elizabeth Warren. She wanted to do 95% of the student debt. Then there was the cancel for economically distressed borrowers, the HEROES Act, which is a $3 trillion stimulus package that's already been put out. Democrats proposed that it would be canceled up to 10,000 for people who are economically distressed. We'll get to that later. And then cancel if you make less than $125,000. Warren and Senator Schumer wanted to cancel $50,000 as a maximum dollars in debt for student loans if you made less than $125,000 per year. So that was a lot to rattle off. And I just want to go with, on a one-on-one basis, what, if anything, do you think somebody should get in terms of student loan forgiveness? Do you believe people deserve student loan forgiveness? If you do, what percentage, what type of numbers, things like that. Remember, there's no right or wrong, guys. This is just how you feel on a personal basis, because I paid my student loans, for instance. So at this point, I'm outside the wagon. I'm one of those 200 million who don't have a federal loan in that sense. So I'm just going to kick it off to Marvin. He looks deep in thought. So Marvin, if you believe at all that student loans should be forgiven on any basis, is there a number you think is fair? If so, how much? Just let's just have a conversation. What do you think, Marv?
I say they should cut it in half. Because for me, I know that it was difficult for me to afford going to school. So outside of getting a scholarship, I needed my student loans to, get through school to cover the rest of my tuition. And I know that without it, I wouldn't have probably been able to go, but I also feel as if when you do leave school, it's also your responsibility to, make sure you're set up with, right employment, outside of what you studied at your institution. But if you're one of those people that don't, and they don't set you up with that, I'm talking about particularly like when I went to acting school. And a lot of people expect something to happen after you graduate is what I mean. They expect some people got this mentality where, I'm just going to start working. I'm going to book this show. I'm going to start doing this. Well, they also didn't take into account that, they have to be responsible for that. So all the loans that they asked for to cover that tuition, they're in a position now it's where it's like, okay, I have to get a job, but at the same time, I still got to pay these loans back. I've been in that position as well. And I know they can also, track you down. So I think, like, in a sense, if you can reduce student loan debt to, I say, like you asked the percentage, I would say a little bit more than 50%, so you're giving people room to pay it back, at a reasonable rate, because if people are struggling to pay their rent or, put food on the table, or even if, for example, if they have a child and they're trying to go to school, I feel like you need to provide people relief, so I think that that's the number that I would go with. And I think that canceling it to a degree where it's like you are giving people a, space to pay it back. Like if you're giving people, a significant amount of time, like some kind of like a cancel debt relief. Even if you don't cancel the whole thing, just for like relief of a certain, time period. It has to be like maybe 9 months where they check in and see how much you're making. And then you can maybe make, and then they can, try to reduce your payment. But I don't feel that, the average everyday American needs to be paying a high student loan debt payment on top of their everyday living. It just doesn't make any sense, so, that's how I feel about it.
Okay. I appreciate your opinion, Marv. Like I said, I think that's going to be really nice about this topic today is we all have different lives and we all have different experiences. So thank you for sharing. Chelsea, your mic's already unmuted. So if you don't mind while Christy's burping Lucas over there, could you give us your opinion?
What do you mean? I'm burping my cat. No, I'm just kidding. He just ran away like, no, you're not. So just to be completely transparent, I do not have any student loan debt pay off. I'm very fortunate. But I do have a lot of friends that were not so fortunate and they currently have quite a bit of loan debt. And I think some of it comes down to a lot of my generation, I feel like was maybe first generation going to college or first generation having to go to college on loans, because in the past it was a lot more affordable. So I think there was a certain level of deception, because if you think about it, when you're in high school, you're 17, 18 years old when you start looking at maybe the universities that you want to go to. And I mean, looking back at how naive I was, and if I had been trying to get set up with a loan and some of these private loan companies come in and intentionally make it seem like it's a better deal than what it is. Like, I have a lot of friends that are in that situation where they didn't have parents that could navigate that with them because their parents didn't have that experience, or they just simply, maybe weren't in their lives for one reason or another. And I have quite a number of them that are currently stuck in these private loans where they've technically paid off the balance of the loan they borrowed, but the interest has screwed them, and they end up owing more in interest than they do in the actual amount of the loan. And in those cases, I think those companies, in my personal opinion, should be penalized. I think they did it intentionally. I think they knew that these people were going to owe them for life, and they set it up that way on purpose. I think it's a little bit different when you have like a federal loan that's stepping in to help you out because financially you can't go to school on your own. I think that's a little bit different. But especially the private loan companies that intentionally screwed people over because they knew that they didn't know any better and that they weren't going to be able to find the information that they needed to know better. Because I have a number of friends that, I mean, depending on the career path that you're in, like, you're probably not going to make six figures. Like, the average job is not going to make you over six figures. And with the cost of living, what it is today, I can't fathom trying to survive on my own in a city away from my parents if I also had student loan debt that I had to pay off. Like, I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be here where I am now if I had that student loan debt, because I wouldn't have the money to survive on my own. I mean, I had friends that had to stay living with their parents for quite a long time because they simply just couldn't afford their monthly payments living on their own, in addition to their student loan payments, because some of the private loan companies would not reduce your loan payments based on your income. They were like, well, tough. You have to pay what we tell you have to pay. So my personal opinion is, I mean, aside from the fact that the education stuff is way overly expensive, like especially for the return on investment, many people do not get the return, depending on the industry. But those private loan companies should be penalized in some way, legally penalized for what they did. And I do think that those people who have those type of loans that are basically, there's no way to get ahead on them, that those should be forgiven.
Okay. And Chelsea, honestly, one of the things that I was talking about the HEROES Act is for private loans, not federal, for that exact purpose, in the sense that a lot of them are more predatory because it's usually 4.5% is the low, up to 12.5%, sometimes almost 15%. And I'll get into that a little more on my end of things in terms of private loans. But Christy, are you good to go, or Lucas needs some more time?
Oh, we're good. So I also do not have student loans. I worked through college. I had 3+ jobs at all times. I've paid as I went. I took federal loans at my very first year. I believe that school loans should not be privatized at all. I think you should just go through the government. And then there should be like a grace period after you graduate. Like, hey, let's make sure you're set up in a good job. Financially, you can start paying us back at like a 1% interest rate or something. Like, just, recoup the money, and you're going to lose on inflation, but there's not going to be as much pressure there. And then you can always work through stuff like with taxes at the end of the year. Like, I don't know. I don't think you should be forgiven for your student loans. You willingly took them, but maybe everybody should have the same interest rate. Like, you shouldn't be fucked because you took student loans, but you should pay them back. But there's also loopholes. You can go work for a nonprofit for 5 or 10 years, and then all your loans are forgiven. There's loopholes. There's ways to get out of your student loans. So if that's what you want to do, go work for a nonprofit. Is that okay?
Thank you. No, sure. No, I mean, whatever you wanted to say. I appreciate it. I appreciate the nonprofit thing. That Chelsea looks like she has something to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have a friend that works for a nonprofit for that reason, because she's like in over her head with debt. The only issue with that is you have to be making your payments on time, have no issues for those 10 years. And nonprofits often do not pay well. I applied to one once. And the position that I applied for should have been in my normal salary range. And they came in at about half of what my salary range was, because they're a nonprofit. So depending on the nonprofit, you usually have to get in with a big one in order to actually have a decent salary. Because at that point, if I'd had student loans, I couldn't have even afforded my rent, let alone my student loans too. And then I would not have qualified for loan forgiveness because I wouldn't have been able to make my payments for those 10 years. So just wanted to throw that out there. Make sure you're making your payments.
I would say, well, I work for a nonprofit now, and it's not for loan forgiveness. It's just because I really appreciate what the non-for-profit stands for.
Yeah.
But it's not my experience that they pay low. I got right in my pay grade. So I guess, probably does totally depend on what not-for-profit you go to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think, to Chelsea's point, I've generally seen what Chelsea said. My friend Claire had to leave Philadelphia to move back home to Ohio. And a big reason was because she liked working. She wanted to work for nonprofits, not for the loan forgiveness, but like, as to Christy's point, she enjoyed working for an organization that wasn't trying to make money, essentially, right? Just trying to break even, so to speak. So she was making about $20,000 less than if she just worked somewhere else. And so she didn't want to sell her soul. So she moved back to Ohio, and she works at a nonprofit in Ohio. So that's what's kind of weird about these nonprofits. Side note is it really does depend on like where you live and how large that organization really is as to whether or not they can accommodate you. Justin, how about you, man?
I appreciate it. And I'm going to do my best to not come across aggressive. And it's definitely not, as far as this panel, I mostly agree. And it wouldn't be aggressive towards any of your points, like I said.
Oh, okay, never mind. I was kind of scared.
No, I'm passionate about the situation. So let's be clear right now, as of now, and I've heard different numbers. We'll stick with that 45. I've heard between 43 and 45 million people tied down with student debt. Roughly $1.7 trillion today would cover that sum. The Congress has already put on Joe Biden's desk is the proposed forgiveness of $50,000 per lender or debtor or people who are in debt. Which
private loans, yes.
Private loans that come out to right around $1 trillion.
Yep.
At the whip of a pen, that could be taken care of. In my opinion, rather than that, I think they would need to just go the whole way. Why go 95% of the way? I understand, and none of you have said it, but some people who are against any of this forgiveness, a lot of it has to do with those that are making, $75,000 to $100,000, $150,000 a year. They don't need, they don't need this forgiveness. They can make their payments, things like that. Let me just run down some things. On that standpoint, I don't think it'd be fair. I don't think you can just target people that are struggling to deal with it and help them and not help, because you've got people like you, Richie, who would have missed the boat on that. If you had struggled through your payment process and then all of a sudden now it's not a thing. I mean, hopefully you would still feel good for the people that are currently struggling, that they would not have to anymore, but you would feel a little gypped. First of all, canceling student debt would put billions of dollars back into the economy over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, just it takes so much weight off of so many people. There are some that have the option to use some sort of loan to subsequent their income and or go with their family's income, but there's a huge difference between like income and wealth. There are many poverty-stricken, and usually that's racially escalated, people who don't have any other option other than to lean on student loans. They would not be able to seek higher education were it not for student loans. And that is something that our fucked up country, pardon my French, has put into place over centuries. So these are, and I think it was, I don't have it written down, I think it was like 36% of those, and myself included, and all the statistics I just mentioned, don't even get to finish school. Whether it be financial hardship trying to finish, lack of focus trying to work and go to school at the same time, regardless of what it is. Specifically, black and brown men and women start behind the 8 ball in this regard as far as their opportunity to get into college. And I think that the country is designed to keep them in debt forever. And I think these privatized loans are just, they're criminals in my opinion. But I think if you're going to do something, you should just take care of it all. And something needs to be done going forward. I don't think that our education system should rely this heavily, because let's be real, it depends on what you get your degree in at this point, whether or not you're even, like Chelsea said, even going to make it anywhere close to 6 figures in your lifetime. Teachers have to go sometimes for 6 years to even be competitive in the market, and then they're still going to be making, $40,000, $50,000 a year. You have to also, like, I had watched something where somebody who's against this fully was saying that, how hard is a $200 payment towards a student loan every month? For some people, it's crippling, and that's the point that I'd like to get across. Is for some people too, not me at this point in my life, but for thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, 200 would be enough to push it over the edge. Would not be able to sustain a car payment, a house payment, and this $200 loan payment. So I don't know what they would do going forward, but personally, I feel like if they're going to do anything, I would. Don't get me wrong, the $50,000 would finish paying off my loans that I'm paying on now. It would take me out of the water, but I'm not really concerned about me. I'm going to be able to handle it over the next 10, 15 years. There's some people that aren't going to be able to. They don't have family wealth to fall back on. They don't have the teaching or training or background to know what to do and navigate through life with this debt looming over their heads. And it's the debt, specifically, the debt is designed to swallow the poverty-stricken people up. And to me, and in some cases, I think that targets minorities even. So,
okay, I appreciate it, man. I'm going to give my 2 cents, and then we'll kind of just have an open forum at that point. So, background: I got a full ride scholarship out of college and got an engineering degree. Afterwards, I hated it, and I went back to school and had to do debt and loans myself because obviously. Financially, you don't plan on going to college a second time, right? Unless you get post-grad. This was a second undergrad degree. So my second undergrad degree, I took up on loans and I paid them off, et cetera, to that point. So I just want to be transparent about my position in life. So having said that, I think there's a lot of things that make this very challenging. And I think what makes it even worse is, you have people trying to push these bills so quickly. Now, what I think is I'm not a fan, there's 2 things that need to happen, in my opinion. Chelsea kind of mentioned private loans, and that's a big part of where a lot of these larger loans come from. Private loans need to be dealt with in a separate vacuum. One reason being is, for instance, if you're a kid of financial wealth, like your family was well off, you will not be able to get a federal loan. So therefore, you are stuck in a private loan, and if your family doesn't contribute, you're in that boat. I was not in that boat, but I'm just clarifying, speaking up for those people who were in privileged families, but then didn't get any contribution from their parents. They had to go private. They didn't even get the luxury of going federal. So to me, what I think needs to happen is I think Congress is taking the wrong approach on pushing the first thing. To me, if you're going to push the first thing, it should be federal, because federal is targeted to what Justin just said. It's targeted to the low income and it's targeted to the minorities and et cetera. And if we're really trying to help social equality and help people who were in debt and are still in debt and have always struggled, you deal with the federal loans first, and then we work on the private. Because then we pull the private, and the private end is what I just said. The children who were either unfortunate that their families made a lot and then didn't contribute, or generally speaking, postgraduates. So that's why I'm not really happy with the idea of people focusing on the private loan, because we have to look at the private loan as a predatory thing from Chelsea's perspective, but we also have to look at who it's generally targeting. And a lot of the times a private loan is the postgraduate people. And don't get me wrong, when we're talking about loan numbers, people, if you really look at it, most of it is the postgraduates, the people that are going for their masters and their doctorates. And then this is kind of to Christy's point. Sometimes you make a decision in life, right? So if you want to be a doctor, it's already a challenging thing. And yes, eventually you make pretty solid money. But what do doctors always say? Crippling debt, right? Now we talk about like us with our, undergraduate degrees. Imagine what they're dealing with in their debt. And yes, you make 100,000+ usually, but the point is this is how much does that help when you got 4.5% to 12.5% on $300,000+, right? That takes a long time for a lot of them too, unless they go private doctor and get out of the public. But again, that's nonprofit versus profit, and we're dealing with these whole concepts. So generally speaking, the postgraduates who make a lot of money end up dealing with the real big. So there's so many nuances here, and I'm not going to try to go left, right, or center on this. All I'm going to say is that there's so many things that need to be changed. In general, we talked about the cost of education. To me, is the focal point. That's what Congress long-term needs to focus on, is the cost of education. We find a way to lower that and not focus on loans. The loans is something entirely separate we need to do. But if somebody wants to go to an undergraduate program, it should either be free or damn near free, period. And then that's where that federal loan comes in, right? At that 1%, 2% margin. That's how you at least make it more accessible, not necessarily afford, but accessible to everyone who wants an undergraduate. When you start going into postgraduate and, secondary colleges and things like that, that's where the debt is going to happen. And I think that's acceptable, quite frankly, but we just need to see in terms of like people doing research, how much, right? How much should a doctor realistically be having to pay based on the current market of what they would make in a public sense, not a private, doctor. And same thing with lawyers, right? Public defender versus a defensive, privatized firm. Totally different amounts of money they're making. So it's a very complex situation, but I think if we focus on the cost of the education and not so much the loans, we can at least get a start. I think the other thing that's like really, really intense about this is just that, how do I want to say this lightly? Hold on. I think it's in a position where financially there is never going to be freedom if there's a loan, and that's just reality, right? So I think when we're younger kids, there's memes about this in different ways, right? They talk about like parallelograms instead of learning how to do your taxes, right? There's usually jokes about that kind of stuff. Well, I really think one of the things that's a disservice when we're growing up is people shove, you need to go to college to have a good life. They force that on you, right? That's a mentality, particularly 60 years ago, that, and it's just always been that way since. And your parents probably said it to you too. You need to go to college. You need to get it. That's kind of what's indoctrinated and thrown down your throat. But the reality is a lot of trade school people or just trade people make great money, right? Like my truckers make almost as much as I do. They didn't go to college. They didn't go into these loans. Now, don't get me wrong. They had to buy a truck and got a loan from that. But nonetheless, that's what I think. I think it comes from educating people in what does college provide, educating people in where these markets really are, right, loan-wise, and then like adjusting. So I think the first thing Congress should focus on is some level of debt, like with the loans. Whether it's 50,000, whether it's 10, make a decision and let's move on. Because what really needs to be targeted is the for-profit marketing of education, right? Higher education. I think if we focus on how much it costs to go to these schools first, then we can tackle the loans second. And I think that the problem is it's the exorbitant cost of college regardless that really leads to this. And when you go to a public school, is it really helping you when you have $80,000+ in loans, right? How is that helpful to a lot of people? And again, as I just mentioned, when you could do a trade, maybe pay $10,000 to $20,000 in an apprenticeship or trade school, which you can get federal loans for, by the way, and then make great money within 2 years and start, a career at 20. But again, like anything, fulfillment comes from desire and goals. So some people may not want to do trade, and I understand that, but that's what makes this such a complex thing. It's not just race. It's not just, poverty. There's so many aspects to this, and, I can't really answer it. I don't think any of us could, but I'm glad we all shared our opinions on it. Does anyone else have anything they would like to say? We still have at least 5 minutes. So if there's anything someone else would like to say, floor is open.
I don't know that I have anything to really add with the loan forgiveness, but like, see, it's really stupid, honestly. I'm literally just looking at my kid and I'm like, I'm just really happy that we can save money back for him to go to college. Like, that's what I'm just grateful for. But like, when people don't have that, that makes me sad. Like when other people are screwed that they can't even put money aside for their kids. So making loans more accessible, and so you're not fucked over for your kids' sake. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I'm what you just said, because, you know, I do want to clarify, not just for the people that are like in poverty, the people that, like, the children of wealthy people who don't get help from them get into private loans. They can't do federal loans. It stinks, you know, and it's like, that's what's something that needs to be looked at too. Is like, if my family doesn't contribute to this education, why am I having to take a loan out that's going to cripple me like many people are crippled, as Justin has just mentioned? So I really do think it's this big whole process of like what a federal loan should and shouldn't be. Should parents' income have any effect on a federal, like being granted a federal loan? Now, how much, you know, that's where they can quantify. But it is, if your parents make over a certain amount of money, you don't qualify for federal loan, period. Even though you might not even live in their house anymore, etc. Like, there's a lot involved with this. It's very challenging.
Yeah, and what I find interesting, I guess this is just really like a thought more so than like a point to make, but like, when you come out of college, that's literally the least amount of money that you're going to make unless you just work like as a server somewhere. I don't know, servers even can make good money depending on where you work, but looking back at like how much I made right out of college versus what I make now, and yet we put all that debt load and there's no, you know, waiting period or anything for giving you an opportunity to get on your feet. Like that, you know, the reason I don't have student loan debt is because my parents saved up and sent me to college. And I did have scholarships and things that helped out. And I had rules I had to follow in order for my dad to cover it and everything. And I, in hindsight, am very grateful for that, because I look at my friends that literally are struggling just to be able to get a house, have kids, start a family, do any of that, because their entire like decade, their 20s, have been stuck on just trying to pay off student loan debt, and they can't touch it because of the interest rates. And it's at a time when you're literally making the least amount of money that you're going to make in your career because you have no experience. And I don't know, I just think, you know, I don't necessarily have all the right answers, but obviously something needs to change because it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And they need to look at, it's a multifaceted issue. So they need to look at a lot of different areas and how it's not really set up to work out well, how they currently have it. And, you know, is that complete loan forgiveness? I don't know, but they definitely need to change something, because it's just going to keep happening if they don't. So
I do have like a little tag, and it's, I think we could even revisit this. I know this is not a 3-part series or anything, but and I can't, Richie, if you can remember it, there is a plan in place now, and it's a mess. I think it's like the ADP or something DP, I'm pretty sure. But it's loan forgiveness after X amount of years of paying correctly, blah, blah, blah. There's been 32 approved in like the 2.5 years of its existence, and it's a mess. The people that run the whole program can't even explain what it does and how it works, or how a student might be able to navigate it to get through it. I think I completely agree with what you all said, especially the priority needing to be going forward. I mean, I think it is a pretty serious, it should be on the priority list, maybe right there, number 2, or like Richie said, just do it. It's on your desk right now. It's already approved. It's already in the national budget. The 1.7 trillion has already been taken out of the national budget. They've already budgeted to do this. Sign the paper, get it over with, and let's figure out how we can make education more affordable, because the truth is a degree doesn't necessarily separate you from the pack anymore. But it is, in a lot of times, required.
Marvin, you got anything to say, brother?
Cancel that shit.
Okay, I do want to add, like, they're going to cancel it. So you say cancel it. So we're canceling it this one time. And then the next generation, are we just going to cancel it every 5 years? Are we just canceling all schools going forward?
There's no for sure that they're going to cancel it. It's just on his desk right now that he could with a pen. But yeah, that's
he could
but what's the follow-up?
Yeah.
Like, you just cancel it going forward, school's free. Like, what's
as
the
of right now, it would stay the same.
Christy, the questions you're asking are exactly why this isn't the solution, right? Because all it does is it helps certain people right now, and it doesn't affect the long term. But, my point was, let's do something so we can focus on like the long-term solution. Whether or not it ends up being 50,000 plus, who knows? Like I said, they've been going through these processes, and this is Congress in a nutshell, whether it's this or anything. Hopefully, when we talked about trafficking yesterday, and we're going to go into that some more. This is the reality of policy. Policy never just gets solved quickly, and unfortunately, everyone suffers for it. So hopefully long-term we'll get something going, but unfortunately, I feel like we're pretty much out of time on this subject. We might approach it again. As you can see, we all have a little bit different opinions on it, but not so much that anybody was like, F you. Maybe next time I'll go with the F you side of things. Y'all pay your own debt. But until then, looking forward to Game of the Week tomorrow, and stay tuned, guys. You're listening to the H2G podcast. You can check us out on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook. You know the deal. You've seen it all.